Okay, so in the previous video we talked about route planning and how to kind of start plotting your routes on your map, how to identify obstacles and start using kind of the terrain association to with your map and compass, your map reading skills and your compass to create a sense of precision. If we want to increase that level of precision in how we're moving through the woods, what we're going to want to do is what's called dead reckoning or deduced reckoning. There's two means of doing that. The first is by counting the paces that you're walking, and you do that with pace counting beads, or ranger beads as they're called. Another method of doing that is using watch and using a time. So we're going to cover time first because this is the most applicable way in which you are going to use dead reckoning in the woods. A lot of times people focus on the beads. We'll talk about the disadvantage of those when we get into the beads. But for most people, using a watch is all you really need to do. So when we've plotted our route out here, which we pre-plotted in the previous video, we saw that this is 0.7 miles. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that mileage that we're going to hike, and I want to kind of get an idea of how far that is, how long that's going to take me to go. And in the previous video I said it was 14 minutes, I believe, hopefully. And what I did to figure that out is basically my time is 60 divided by the speed of travel, so that's 3 miles an hour, times the distance, 0.7, and that's going to get me 14 minutes. So in 14 minutes of time was going to take me to get through here to here. Now why is that important? Let's say I can't see in front of me. Woods is too dense, maybe it's too thick, maybe there's fog, maybe there's a snowstorm. And if I stay on this path, if I pull my compass out and put it on set to the bearings that I should be on to stay on this baseline that I've created, I stay on that baseline for 14 minutes. I don't need to see anything in front of me. I don't need to do any terrain association. All I have to do is just stay on the course, and I can go from leg to leg or straight to that destination. So this is essentially how boats navigate, how planes navigate, how submarines do it without a windshield. So if you've ever wondered, they will just go from point to point each leg of their trip, and if they can maintain a very consistent speed, then you can plug that into that equation and get a rough idea or a very exact idea depending on how many legs and how many increments that you're going and your speed. If you want to figure out distance that you've traveled, then you can figure that out by your speed times the time that you're traveling, so 3 miles an hour, times the 14 minutes. I'm going to divide that by 60, and then that's going to give me the distance that I've traveled. And so what I can do then is from there is that I can take that distance that I've traveled and I can plot my location. So if I've been hiking for 15 minutes from this destination, to use that example again, then I know I'm going to be about 0.7 miles from my from the original location, so I can mark that. And what that means then is I'm going to be roughly in this area here, somewhere in here. And so I can use this information to start pinpointing my location, which we'll talk about in a separate video. So what I would suggest, if you're going across an ocean or a large piece of land, you want to be able to kind of do a check-in, kind of create a checkpoint about every 30 minutes. I would recommend at least every 15 minutes, every 15-minute leg. So that would be, for me, that would be every 0.7 miles is a checkpoint that I want to create. So this particular ruler, for example, on this particular compass, goes 0.7 miles. Which I find that to be pretty handy because that's going to be in and around that 15-minute mark that I'm going to want. So if I'm plotting a route on here, I want to make sure that if I want to go from this location on the map to this location on the edge of the map here, that every 0.7 miles, or every 15 minutes, I have now indicated roughly a spot where I want to do a check-in. So that means from this road to this lake, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3 check-in points to help get me from this location to this location using dead reckoning. If you need to stop for whatever reason while you're traveling, let's say I'm going from this location here to here, but I decide I want to fish at this lake intermittently, then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to calculate that in my time of travel. So if I want to stay consistent, I'm going to set my stopwatch on my watch for that rate of travel, so that I know if I've gone 15 minutes, say on my watch here, that the chronograph, then I'll know how far I've gone. But let's say if I stop for lunch or I want to eat, then all I need to do is just stop my travel and do what I want to do, and then once I resume, start it up again and continue on my way. The same goes with any kind of obstacle that you might find. So if I come from this road here and I want to get around this lake, I've judged my distance that I'm traveling as the crow flies, and I need to stop my time, get around this lake, get back to my same location, and then continue on. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a second. Beads are very similar. Each bead is going to represent 10 meters of travel. So every time I've walked 10 meters, so let's just say my stride or my pace is 5 meters, just for sake of argument. Every time my left foot hits the ground twice, I'm going to move a bead down. Left foot hits the ground, or right foot. That's why armies say left, left, left. You're counting your pace every time your left foot gets down. So that's 2, and then 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on. And then once I've gotten to 9 kilometers, which 9 beads, my 10th kilometer, or 10, once I've got 9 meters, sorry, then each bead at the top is pulled down to represent a kilometer. So this is the first kilometer, and then I'll continue on. I move this down, that's 1 kilometer. Move my beads up, 10 meters, 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 and then I got to my 9th, do 2 more paces, and then now I'm 2 kilometers. So I've now hiked 2 kilometers, and I keep record of that as I'm walking. So I'm just counting my paces, counting my steps. Where this works really great is when you're concentrating on your steps. If you're backpacking, if you're moving around, if you're hunting, if you're distracted, you can oftentimes the pace counting doesn't work very well, whereas time is going to work good. Time works really well when that pace can be very very consistent. If the time of travel is very consistent, otherwise this is going to give you some more gross ideas of where you're at. Whereas if you're counting your pace, you can be very precise. So the question is, do you need to be that precise or not? So if you don't have pace beads, that's fine. You can find 10 little stones, and you can stick 10 stones in one pocket and just move 1 stone from another pocket to another pocket. And once you've gotten to the 10 stones in one pocket, you've hiked one kilometer. Now, the problem with using the pace beads and kilometers and trying to adjust back and forth between mileage can be confusing. And a lot of people that navigate will choose either using metric system or English system. And it's just a lot simpler to use that metric system for many reasons. However, all the maps, compasses, everything else is based on the English system. So if you use the metric system for your travel, then it would behoove you to have a compass that has centimeters, not just one that has inches. So again, it goes back to how are you going to use your map, how are you going to use your terrain, and that's going to help you select the features that you need on your compass. So it's going to help you more to have centimeters if you're using pace counting, for example, than it would to have other, another feature, right? So let your needs dictate the features of your compass. All right. Okay, so next we're going to talk, this is a kind of a continuation to dead reckoning, in that we're going to talk about how to get around an obstacle using what's called LAMS, and that's an acronym for less, add, more, subtract. Less, add, more, subtract. And basically what this is trying to figure out a back bearing and how to get a back bearing to go back to where you need to go. So if you're less than 180 degrees, then you want to add 180 degrees to the dial, to the bezel here, to get you your back bearing. All right, and why you'd want a back bearing is, let's say you get to this lake here and you decide you want to go back to the road. Well, if the measurement that you've measured, the bearing that you've measured between these 2 points is less than 180 degrees, then you want to add 100 degrees. So you're adding 200. So that's 200 minus 20. I'm sorry. So you're going to add then 180 degrees to this. And, the quick math, to make it a little bit easier to figure this out, is you're actually going to be adding 200 and then minus 20. And that'll get you your 180 degrees if you have a hard time kind of conceptualizing or doing that math in your head. If my bearings was over 180 degrees, then I want to subtract 180, which means subtracting 200 and then adding 20 to that. And again, if you're working with those smaller numbers, 180 minus, plus is harder to do in your head. It gives you kind of a tool to do that, kind of simplifies that. And the other way you can think about it is if it's 90 degrees plus or minus, you use that 90 degrees as a cutoff point, or you just ignore the needle altogether, or the bezel altogether, and you just use what you can see vertically across your southern, what your southern pointing needle is going to point at. So if it's 20 degrees here, then it's 200 degrees at your needle. So you just look at that needle to tell you what your back bearing needs to be. So you can very quickly look at that back bearing without having to go through the fuss of adding and subtracting. And that's personally what I use quite a bit. So, again, if you're at 80 degrees, instead of adding and subtracting 180, that's 100, that's exactly west. So then I turn my bezel to the direction of arrow to the direction that I need to go, which is exactly west. And then I go in that direction. All right, so let's say if we wanted to get around an object, then what we're going to do is we're going to go to that object. Let's say we want to get around that lake. So we'll shoot our bearing to the location, or an azimuth to that location at lake. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stop our watch. Or if you have your pace speeds, you can start beginning to pace. So from here to here, you might not need to know. There might not be any reason to do any dead reckoning, but you might need to know the pace that it's going to take for you to go so many feet or so much time south. So I turn my compass to 90 degrees, I go south so many paces, or so, let's say for 15 minutes, okay? And then I am going to set my compass to another 90-degree turn. I'm going to clear the lake, Now I'm going to remember how many paces or how much time. Let's say it took me 2 minutes. So I set my stopwatch for 2 minutes, or I count my paces to get back to exactly the location that I want. Now I can double check that by looking at a feature of where I started off. That's fine, but oftentimes you can't do that. And you basically just have to use your dead reckoning. And then I'm going to do is I'm going to set my compass back on course of where it was before. I can add 90 degrees and I'll continue on with my course. So I can get around hills, lakes, marshy area, whatever I want to avoid. I can use my dead reckoning to kind of get me through that, and without needing to use any terrain association. So for a pitch dark night, when I come across this lake and I want to get around this lake safely, then I can use my dead reckoning skills to do that. So I definitely do suggest, if you're going to do dead reckoning, especially with beads or time, experiment with it and play around with that. Go around a park with dead reckoning skills, using on the sidewalk or a trail or whatever, just to start getting familiar with how to move around obstacles. Okay,